From a young age, my brother embodied the spirit of resilience. Growing up in a small town, he demonstrated an unwavering commitment to serving his country, eager to protect the freedoms we often take for granted. After enlisting and completing rigorous training, he was deployed to combat zones where he distinguished himself in countless operations. Yet, like many brave service members, he faced life-altering challenges when he sustained severe injuries during a mission. Despite his physical limitations, his determination never wavered. He was known for his optimistic outlook and a fierce will to regain independence, a quality that inspired everyone around him. The veteran's journey became prominent not just in our community but nationwide, as he shared his story of recovery and adaptation through various media channels. His message was simple yet powerful: overcoming adversity is possible with grit and support. When he moved back in with me after completing rehabilitation, I could see the spark in him. Our family rallied around him, eager to help ease his transition back into civilian life. Together, we refurbished the house to be more accessible, decorating it with mementos that reminded him of triumphs and fond memories. But as we navigated through this adjustment phase, one lingering issue remained: the need for a wheelchair ramp. After submitting the application for approval to build a simple ramp, I felt confident that the HOA would treat our request compassionately given my brother's remarkable background. Surely they would understand the importance of accessibility for someone who had sacrificed so much for our nation. However, their response was not what I anticipated. They labeled it as aesthetic pollution, emphasizing their commitment to maintaining property values over providing essential accommodations. The rejection hit hard amid our hopes for healing and joy. I couldn't comprehend how anyone could dismiss my brother's needs so callously, especially after all he had endured serving our country. What happened next would alter the course of our lives forever, a tragic event that would expose deep-rooted injustices and ignite a fire for change where there should have been none. After my brother moved in, we felt a glimmer of hope for a fresh start. We had spent countless hours discussing his new life post-rehabilitation, the things he wanted to achieve, and how this home could become a sanctuary for him, a place where he could reclaim a sense of normalcy. Welcoming him into my space was not just about proximity. It was about fostering an environment that would help him regain independence and confidence. As we unpacked his belongings, memories obscured by time resurfaced, filling the house with nostalgia. His medals and photos lined the walls as constant reminders of the brave spirit that resided within him. I envisioned family gatherings where we would share laughter and stories, a community built around mutual support, especially considering the sacrifices he made for us all. But beyond emotional attachments lay practicalities that required urgent attention. Accessibility was crucial for my brother's comfort and safety. The two-story layout of my home presented obstacles that felt insurmountable at times. Stairs represented more than just physical barriers. They were reminders of fragility. It became clear that a wheelchair ramp was not merely a convenience. It was an essential lifeline that would allow him to move freely in and out of the house without fear or assistance. I carefully planned how the ramp would blend seamlessly with our home's structure while ensuring it met all necessary guidelines for safety and durability. My heartfelt intention was to create a welcoming atmosphere that prioritized my brother's needs over any superficial aesthetics. However, I never anticipated the immediate resistance from the HOA, the very organization I believed would empathize with our situation. Their rejection echoed through me like thunder: aesthetic pollution. Those words pierced through our dreams of renewal, leaving us grappling with disbelief and helplessness as they emphasized their commitment to maintaining uniformity rather than embracing diversity and inclusion. Despite my brother's service to this country, it seemed his needs fell on deaf ears in favor of immovable ideals. Yet amidst this conflict, my determination deepened. I knew I had to fight not only for my brother, but also for everyone who faced similar struggles in silence. Little did I know how drastically our lives were about to change, and not in ways we ever anticipated. Determined to ensure my brother's safety and mobility, I set out to navigate the process of applying for a wheelchair ramp. The first step involved drafting a detailed proposal, outlining not just the design of the ramp, but also its necessity. I included measurements, materials, and how it would integrate with the existing architecture of our home. I wanted to make it clear that this ramp was not merely a convenience, but an essential modification that would significantly enhance my brother's quality of life. With the application in hand, I approached the HOA with a sense of optimism, believing they would understand the gravity of my brother's situation. The submission process felt like a test. I meticulously followed all guidelines and even consulted with local contractors to ensure that my plans adhered to safety standards. My hope was grounded in the belief that once they grasped the rationale behind our request, especially given his service as a wounded veteran, they would approve it without hesitation. As soon as I submitted the application, however, doubt began to creep in. The HOA's previous decisions had been driven by strict adherence to their community standards, often at the expense of personal circumstances. Still, I held on to the belief that compassion could prevail in this situation. As days turned into weeks, I eagerly awaited a response, confident that my brother's needs would finally be recognized. When the rejection arrived, it felt like a punch to the gut. The HOA's letter dismissed our request outright, labeling it aesthetic pollution. Their explanation was devoid of empathy or understanding. They spoke about maintaining property values and community appearance without acknowledging the human aspect of my brother's circumstances. This refusal wasn't just a bureaucratic decision, it was a denial of his dignity and needs. As I processed their response, it became painfully clear that my brother's well-being was not a priority for them. The situation escalated beyond disappointment. It ignited a fierce determination within me to challenge this injustice, not just for my brother, but for anyone facing similar barriers. This fight would become much more than about building a ramp. It was about dismantling an oppressive mindset that equated aesthetics with humanity and accessibility. Little did we know this struggle would soon lead us down an unexpected path toward change. After weeks of anticipation, the HOA's response finally arrived, and it was met with disbelief. Their letter was an enumeration of rules and regulations that seemed devoid of any humanity, outlining their decision to deny my application for the wheelchair ramp. They referred to it as aesthetic pollution, framing my brother's need for accessibility as a violation of their precious community standards. This labeling felt like a personal attack on his dignity, reducing his struggle to a mere issue of aesthetics. The reasoning behind the denial was baffling. The HOA stressed the importance of maintaining property values and uniformity within the neighborhood, placing these concerns above the pressing needs of its residents. They seemed unconcerned with how vital this ramp was for my brother's mobility. It was as if they couldn't see past their rigid guidelines to recognize the life behind the request. It quickly became evident that their inflexibility overshadowed any compassion or understanding. To add insult to injury, the letter included a menacing warning. If I attempted to build the ramp without their approval, I would face daily fines until it was removed. This threat hung heavy over us, amplifying the distress already present in our lives. Rather than offering assistance or alternatives, the HOA presented itself as a gatekeeper, more interested in enforcing compliance than supporting someone who had sacrificed so much for his country. As I reread their letter multiple times, frustration morphed into a determination that churned within me. How could they prioritize aesthetics over my brother's basic needs? In a world where compassion should dictate action, here was an organization choosing rules over individuals. It became increasingly clear that this fight wasn't just about one ramp. It symbolized a broader issue: the systemic barriers faced by those with disabilities. In grappling with this disappointing reality, I resolved to take action, not just for my brother, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized by similar bureaucratic indifference. I envisioned our struggle exposing an ugly facet of community governance that often goes unnoticed and unchallenged. Little did I know how quickly events would unfold from there. A tragic incident would soon propel our fight into a much larger arena than I had ever anticipated. The day started off like any other, but a heavy sense of dread clouded the air. My brother had expressed anxiety about navigating the stairs without the ramp, but I had reassured him that he could manage. I never imagined that what would unfold would change our lives irrevocably. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch when I heard a thud followed by an eerie silence. My heart sank as I rushed to the staircase. There he lay at the bottom, unable to move. In that moment, time froze. The world outside faded away, leaving only panic and disbelief. The staircase that had seemed so mundane now loomed like a dark omen, a stark reminder of our desperate efforts for accessibility that had been rendered impossible by the HOA's refusal. I knelt beside him, trying to assess the situation, my voice trembling as I called his name. He didn't respond. A rush of emotions flooded over me, fear, anger, and a sorrow that seemed too heavy to bear. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to call for help. Paramedics arrived swiftly but efficiently, their urgency stark against the stillness of our home. As they worked to revive him, my brother was fighting against unimaginable odds. Days later, when doctors confirmed what we all dreaded, that he hadn't woken up, I felt my world shatter into pieces. The gravity of his fall weighed heavily on me. Not only was he gone, but it became painfully clear that this tragedy stemmed from a preventable situation. The ramp we had fought for so fervently represented more than just a piece of wood and metal. It symbolized safety, independence, and dignity, elements stripped away in his moment of need. The incident ignited a fire within me. His life and bravery deserved more than a mere issue of aesthetics. It demanded justice and change. I began to compile evidence, the emails mocking his needs, documentation of our struggles with the HOA, as if each piece offered some hope of transforming this senseless loss into momentum for change. The urgency now felt monumental. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about paving a path so that no one else would endure similar heartbreak due to bureaucratic indifference. As grief mingled with rage, I prepared myself for what lay ahead, a fight not only in memory of my brother, but for all those who have been sidelined by systemic neglect. The news of my brother's death sent shockwaves rippling through our community and beyond. Family, friends, and supporters gathered in disbelief, united by the profound loss of a man who had become a symbol of resilience and hope. The circumstances surrounding his passing, the rejection from the HOA and the subsequent tragedy, ignited outrage among those who knew him and those who didn't, but recognized the injustice embedded in the story. Social media erupted with messages of support, memorials, and calls for accountability. Hashtags dedicated to my brother's memory trended as people shared their stories of navigating similar barriers, amplifying voices that had long been silenced by bureaucratic indifference. Veterans organizations rallied around our family, expressing their grief and solidarity. They emphasized that this was not just a personal tragedy, but a collective failure to protect those who served our nation. As I sifted through messages pouring in from across the country, I felt both heartened by the support and angered by the HOA's blatant disregard for my brother's dignity. Many expressed disbelief that an organization could prioritize aesthetics over human lives. The emails I had collected, those mocking his disability, were circulated widely, exposing the HOA's callous nature to a public audience. Community meetings sprang up almost overnight as residents wanted to discuss how to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. People shared their own experiences with accessibility issues, forming a coalition demanding change not only locally but also at state levels. It was invigorating to see so many rallying for reform. It reinforced my belief that my brother's legacy could spur meaningful action. As family members and allies began organizing vigils to celebrate his life, we also focused on planning for future advocacy efforts aimed at improving disability rights in our community. We knew we had to turn our grief into momentum, transforming sorrow into action that would honor his memory while working to ensure safety and accessibility for all. The outrage over my brother's death became a catalyst for change. Discussions about broader systemic issues of accessibility now echoed through local media outlets and beyond. It became clear that his story had resonated far beyond our small community. A movement was beginning to take shape, fueled by love, anger, and an unyielding desire for justice. In the wake of my brother's death, I delved deeper into the HOA's communications, determined to uncover any evidence that pointed to their negligence and cruelty. What I found was nothing short of shocking. Emails exchanged among board members included comments that openly mocked my brother's disability, revealing a blatant disregard for not just him, but for all residents with similar needs. Phrases like "just another eyesore" and "unnecessary modification" echoed through the digital pages, leaving me reeling with anger and disbelief. These exchanges highlighted a systemic failure within the HOA to accommodate disabled residents, showcasing a culture steeped in insensitivity and exclusion. It became painfully clear that my brother's struggles were not isolated incidents. They were emblematic of a broader issue that affected countless individuals who were left to navigate barriers without support or understanding. Each email was a testament to an organization more concerned with appearances than with the lives of its residents. Fired up by the evidence I had uncovered, I began reaching out to others in the community who had faced similar issues. Through conversations and gatherings, we shared our experiences, stories that resonated deeply with those who had felt marginalized or overlooked by the HOA's rigid policies. Together, we built a narrative around the insidious nature of the HOA's approach, weaving my brother's story into a larger campaign for justice. With mounting evidence of the HOA's inappropriate conduct, I collaborated with advocacy groups focused on disability rights. They recognized the significance of my findings and helped me expand our reach beyond our neighborhood, drawing attention to the systemic barriers faced by disabled individuals across the state. The coalition we formed was not merely about seeking justice for my brother's tragic death. It aimed to ignite widespread change in how communities accommodate their vulnerable members. As public pressure mounted, local media picked up on our fight, amplifying our calls for accountability. The letters, emails, and audio recordings became crucial pieces in our case against the HOA, highlighting a systematic pattern of neglect and hostility toward individuals needing assistance. It was no longer just a personal battle. It was a collective movement striving for reform and recognition, a fight destined to transform the landscape of accessibility within our community and beyond. Inspired by the growing outrage and fueled by a shared sense of purpose, I began to organize a coalition of community members dedicated to advocating for justice and reform. This coalition emerged from the collective grief and anger surrounding my brother's death, a gathering of veterans, disability rights activists, and concerned citizens who recognized the urgent need for change. Our first meeting was held in a local community center, a small yet symbolic space that had once hosted gatherings for veterans returning home. As we sat together, stories flowed freely, each voice adding to a tapestry of shared experiences that underscored the importance of accessibility and compassion within our neighborhoods. Veterans who had faced their own struggles with reintegrating into civilian life spoke about the barriers they encountered, while activists detailed systematic issues plaguing those with disabilities. It became evident that our fight was not only personal but also universal. As we forged plans for advocacy, letters were drafted to local officials, calling attention to the need for improved accessibility standards in our community. Flyers promoting awareness were distributed throughout the neighborhood, while social media campaigns began gaining traction online. We utilized platforms like Facebook and Twitter to amplify our message, sharing testimonials and organizing rallies to demonstrate support for our cause. Support from established veterans organizations poured in as word spread about our coalition's mission. Their involvement lent credibility and resources to our efforts while connecting us with a broader network of advocates across the state. Together, we organized events that showcased the stories of individuals affected by similar injustices, intertwining personal narratives with calls for legislative change. As our movement gained momentum, we began to strategize for public hearings, opportunities where we could present our evidence against the HOA and demand accountability. With emails mocking my brother's disability as a critical piece of evidence, we were determined to make a powerful statement that would resonate with policymakers. The coalition created a sense of unity among people who often felt isolated in their struggles. It was comforting to know we weren't alone in this fight. As we prepared for the hearings, I felt an overwhelming sense of hope. Together, we could transform our grief into action and honor my brother's legacy by advocating for a future where accessibility is prioritized over aesthetics. The outrage surrounding my brother's death reached higher echelons, leading to congressional hearings that would put the HOA's practices under scrutiny. As I sat in the packed conference room filled with advocates, community members, and lawmakers, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Testimonies echoed off the walls, revealing a tapestry of struggles faced by those with disabilities, stories mirroring my brother in troubling ways. Veterans spoke of their experiences navigating both physical barriers and bureaucratic indifference, detailing instances where their needs had been sidelined by regulations rooted in aesthetics. Each narrative compounded the urgency of our cause, prompting lawmakers to recognize the broader implications of an infrastructure that continuously failed to accommodate individuals who had given so much for their country. I took my place among a panel of witnesses, heart racing as I shared not only my brother's story, but also the heinous emails that criticized his disability. I felt a wave of support wash over me as I described how society often overlooks the human cost of such policies. With every word, it became clear that we weren't simply advocating for change. We were demanding recognition and respect for those who'd been marginalized. The committee listened intently, taking notes and asking probing questions, highlighting gaps in current laws regarding housing accessibility. The disconnect between community aesthetics and individual dignity became an undeniable focus. Lawmakers began to express their shock over the systemic failings reflected in the HOA's behavior, a willingness to prioritize property values over lives. As testimonies continued, feelings of anger mingled with determination. Advocacy groups rallied outside the chambers, holding signs and chanting slogans urging policymakers to honor the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) and ensure its enforcement. The spectacle demonstrated that this was no longer just a local fight. It had captured the attention of the nation and ignited conversations about disability rights on a larger scale. With each witness, including former HOA members admitting to their wrongdoings under pressure, it became evident that accountability was not just a distant hope, but an achievable goal. As I left the hearing that day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, we were not just honoring my brother's legacy. We were shaping a future where accessibility would be foundational to community living rather than an afterthought or burden. The journey was far from over, but I was more convinced than ever that we were on the right path toward creating a safer, more inclusive world for everyone. The fallout from the congressional hearings was swift and far-reaching, marking a pivotal moment in our fight for justice. As the evidence against the HOA mounted, including the damning emails that showcased their disregard for my brother's needs, it became clear that accountability was essential. The chair of the committee announced that they would not only recommend legislative changes, but also refer the HOA president for criminal charges based on the documented negligence and harassment of residents with disabilities. When the news broke that the HOA president had been arrested amidst accusations of misconduct and discrimination, a wave of relief swept through our coalition. It felt as though justice was finally being served, not just for my brother, but for all those who had suffered under the HOA's oppressive policies. The board's disbandment soon followed, as investigators uncovered more instances of systemic failure to accommodate disabled residents. Their rigid adherence to aesthetic standards over human dignity had led to an environment where many felt marginalized and unheard. In the weeks following these events, media outlets across the nation covered the story extensively, shining a spotlight on the broader implications of our case. Interviews with community members and advocates highlighted how deeply entrenched biases had taken root in housing practices. The story of my brother's tragic death transformed from a local incident into a national dialogue about disability rights and accessibility laws. New legislation began to take shape as lawmakers introduced bills aimed at strengthening protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA). Advocacy groups rallied around these proposals, emphasizing that no one should have to fight for basic rights in their own communities. Public sentiment shifted as citizens began to demand more empathetic policies that recognized the unique challenges faced by individuals with disabilities. As I watched these changes unfold, I felt a profound mix of emotions: grief for my brother's absence, pride in what we had accomplished together as a community, and hope for a future where accessibility is prioritized. The path ahead was still laden with challenges, but we had ignited a movement that could no longer be ignored. Together, we were transforming pain into progress, ensuring that my brother's legacy would be one of enduring change, one that would usher in a new era of equity and compassion within our neighborhoods. As the dust settled on the hearings and the community began to reclaim a sense of hope, significant changes were set in motion regarding disability rights and housing regulations in our state. In response to the overwhelming support for reform and the damning evidence presented during the hearings, lawmakers fast-tracked a series of legislative measures aimed at enhancing protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA). The new laws mandated stricter guidelines for housing developments, ensuring that accessibility requirements would no longer be an afterthought but a fundamental aspect of community planning. This legislation included provisions for wheelchair ramps, wider doorways, and increased accommodations for common areas, changes that would create a safer environment for individuals with disabilities throughout our neighborhoods. Advocacy groups hailed these updates as a long overdue victory. Individuals who had previously felt marginalized now found their voices amplified through a legislative framework that recognized their worth and dignity. The new accessibility requirements weren't merely legal obligations. They symbolized a societal shift towards inclusivity and empathy, a direct response to the tragedy that had ignited this movement. Community workshops were organized to educate residents about the new laws, fostering an environment where discussions about accessibility became commonplace rather than taboo. Participants learned about their rights and how to advocate effectively for those who might still feel hesitant or unsure about voicing their concerns. I found great satisfaction in knowing that these sessions empowered others to take action in safeguarding their own needs. As implementation of these new regulations began, developers faced increased scrutiny to comply with accessibility standards before any projects could be approved. There was an undeniable shift in attitudes toward inclusivity. Builders started approaching design with an eye towards functional beauty, keenly aware that aesthetics should never override human safety and dignity. Yet amidst all this progress, reminders of my brother's legacy persisted. Each time I drove through our neighborhood and saw the newly constructed ramps or witnessed families enjoying public spaces designed with accessibility in mind, his memory fueled me further. We had turned grief into action, not just for those who suffered under oppressive systems, but for future generations who would benefit from these vital changes. As I stood with community members at local events celebrating our achievements, it was clear that we weren't just advocating for legislation. We were fostering a culture where every individual is valued and included. My brother may have left this world too soon, but together we ensured that our fight, for justice continued to make ripples in the fabric of our society. Reflecting on my brother's life and the powerful movement that emerged from his tragic death fills me with a mix of sorrow and hope. He was not just a veteran, he was a beacon of resilience who faced tremendous challenges with strength and dignity. His story catalyzed a broader conversation about the rights of individuals with disabilities, highlighting issues that had long remained in the shadows. What began as a personal battle against the HOA's indifference became a national dialogue, influencing not just local policies, but encouraging other states to reevaluate their accessibility standards. The reforms triggered by our fight ensured that what had happened to my brother would not be in vain. Instead, it would serve to improve countless lives for years to come. As these changes took shape, I found comfort in the thought that his legacy could resonate through each ramp built and each doorway widened. In the months following the hearings, community groups continued to collaborate, organizing events focused on educating residents about their rights under the HOA. Advocacy for accessibility extended beyond mere compliance. It became an integral part of community identity. Families previously isolated by barriers shared their stories, revealing how important it was to foster understanding and empathy among all residents. Our coalition also focused on monitoring housing developments to ensure that newly enacted regulations were followed and fidelity to accessibility standards was maintained. This work helped create stronger connections within neighborhoods, bridging gaps between developers and advocates while emphasizing shared goals of inclusivity and respect. Furthermore, utilizing social media platforms allowed us to keep the conversation alive. Engaging videos and testimonials transformed personal experiences into collective narratives that encouraged citizens across the nation to advocate for improved accessibility. These efforts empowered individuals who felt voiceless in their struggles against systemic hurdles. As I attend local gatherings, witnessing families enjoying public spaces designed with newfound inclusivity in mind, I am reminded of my brother's spirit. Each time someone navigates a newly constructed ramp or accesses a park without barriers, it is a testament to his memory, a reminder that fighting for justice can indeed spark meaningful change. While our journey continues, the impact we've made serves as proof that together we can transform grief into action and create lasting improvements for future generations. My brother's legacy lives on as a call to never settle for less than dignity and respect for all.